The Bucs get a wake-up call after being embarrassed by the Broncos. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this post-game live episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at @JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as the editor-in-chief of the 813.TV, here with you every Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message, no ads or anything like that. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. The biggest takeaways and an airing of the grievances coming up in a little bit, but we're going to start with the biggest moment in this game, and it came early. After the Buccaneers defense was sliced and diced on Denver's opening drive, the offense came out and did absolutely nothing. But then the defense appeared to wake up a little bit, and they forced a punt of their own. And that's when things went off the rails for the Bucs, and they would never recover. The offense got going a little bit, a pass to Godwin. Rachaad White runs for a first down. Then he runs for 4 more yards. A dump off to Otten sets up 3rd and 4 on their own 30. And we all know what that means, right? 3rd and 4, get it to Godwin, keep the chains moving, and march on down the field. Well, no, that's not at all what happened. Instead, Baker Mayfield made a terrible decision to throw to Mike Evans with a safety sitting up over top. Not only that, but he threw it late and he threw it short. As a result, Brandon Jones jumps up, picks it off, and runs it back to the Buccaneers' 9-yard line. 4 plays later, the Broncos are in the end zone with a 14-0 lead in the first quarter. There was no coming back from that. Not when the ensuing possession was their second 3-and-out of the game. That was the early nail in the coffin in this game. And look, it is my job to sit here behind a microphone and talk about the Buccaneers. But I have no words to describe what that game was. I can't even be mad like I was after the implosion and the loss to the Houston Texans last year. The game against Denver on Sunday was just pathetic. In every facet of every phase of the game, it was pathetic. There was no sense of urgency. There was no sense of pride. There was nothing. That was a Byron Leftwich offense and a Mike Smith defense. It was the worst of the last, 8 years of Buccaneers football. And that was what we witnessed on Sunday. I said it last week. This had the makings of a trap game. The Bucs were riding an emotional high from that win in Detroit. And then with Philly and Atlanta coming up on the other side of this game, it was real easy to overlook an 0-2 Denver team with a rookie quarterback that was throwing interceptions instead of touchdowns. Sean Payton talked about how confident he was in their game plan coming into this game, and he should have been confident. Sean Payton is 7-0 against Todd Bowles' defenses all time in the regular season. He could have gone out there with Bryce Young, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and Charles Sims and won this game. He has Todd Bowles' number, and it showed. As for Liam Cohen, this was a terrible game from him. The play calling was as vanilla as it's been all year. Bucky Irving was giving this team shots of adrenaline, and then we wouldn't see him for 2 straight possessions. There were still no adjustments or help for the offensive line. Why are you drawing up plays for Trey Palmer on third down? You had success getting the ball to Mike quick, on these slants, and then that went away. Surtain was giving him 10 to 15 yards of cushion while Baker was getting bludgeoned by the Broncos pass rush. Why aren't there more quick passes being dialed up to your best wide receiver or to the guy that has been your best wide receiver this season in Chris Godwin? Vance Joseph just laid out the blueprint for how to shut down the Bucs offense. An offense that looked like it was one of the best in week 1. It did just enough to get a win in week 2. Then it looked like one of the worst that the NFL has to offer in week 3. The Eagles just held the Saints, who were the most explosive offense in the league the first 2 weeks, to 12 points. You think an offensive performance like the one the Bucs just had is going to put points on the board and win against Philly? Win against Atlanta? No, they're going to get their doors blown off just like they did in this game. We can talk all we want about how much the defense needs Vita Vea and needs Kalijah Kancey and needs Antoine Winfield Jr. But the truth of the matter is simply this. The biggest blow to this Buccaneers team that they have taken on the injury front is Luke Goedeke, and it's not even close. The defense has found a way to overcome not having Vita Vea, not having Kalijah Kancey, not having Antoine Winfield Jr. Christian Izien has been fantastic in place of Antoine Winfield Jr. What they have not been able to overcome is not having their full allotment of starting offensive linemen. It has been a disaster the last 2 weeks without Luke Goedeke on the field. I've said it for you long-time everydayers. From the first time that David and I talked on this podcast about the offensive line, something like 7 or 8 years ago at this point, that, the offensive line is like an orchestra. They all have to play their part, and they all have to trust the other instruments to play their parts the correct way. There is no trust along this offensive line right now because too many guys are coming in early, they're coming in late, they're playing the wrong notes, they're not doing their jobs. Justin School was not as bad as he was against the Lions, but Cody Mauch was worse. Graham Barton was getting beat. It was ugly. Even Tristan Wirfs got beat a couple of times and allowed pressure to get to Baker Mayfield. The entire offensive line as a unit is a hot mess. It has to get figured out. You're going against Philly, Atlanta, New Orleans, Atlanta again, Baltimore, Kansas City, San Francisco. You think those teams are not going to lay Baker out if this offensive line does not get their crap together? It's going to happen, and it's going to get ugly, and it's going to get ugly real fast. Going to jump into the comments real quick before we move on. Ben Rosa, my guy, great comparison. Leftwich and Smith, spot on. I really was just trying to think of the worst that we've seen over the course of the last few years. Coach RJ, I was at the game. It was a lot of Broncos fans there. There's going to be. I talked about it during the offseason. I can't remember exactly when in the offseason, but I talked about how there's going to be a lot of visiting fans in Raymond James Stadium. It happens every year. It happens every game, and there's a reason for it. Whether it's because people want to escape their home for the better weather in the wintertime, if it's because of all the transplants. Tampa is a transplant city. So there's a lot of people that move there and they bring their old allegiances with them. Yeah, they'll still root for the Bucs as long as they're not playing their original favorite team. There might be a lot of people in the Tampa area that moved there that have been lifelong Broncos fans, and they'll root for the Bucs unless the Broncos are in town. It happens all the time, and at this point, it just kind of has to be accepted. It is what it is. But there's always going to be a large contingent of visiting fans in that stadium, no matter who the opponent is and no matter what time of year it is. That's just what happens. Bantry says there was way too much up the middle. I'm going to assume that you're talking about the pass rush, and I agree 100%. A lot of the pressure that was on Baker Mayfield in this one came from the interior of of the offensive line, came from the interior on the defense. Malk was getting beat like a drum. Graham Barton, this is the worst that I have seen him look, at least watching in real time. I'm going to have to go back and watch more of it to see if he was really getting beat that bad. Bredesen did not have a great game. The entire interior of the offensive line looked rough in this one. And credit to Vance Joseph, credit to the Broncos defense. They had the right game plan. They were ready to come in and steal this one away from the Buccaneers. Biggest takeaways on both sides of the ball. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Comes to game day, I need three things: wings for me, pizza for the kids, and drinks all around. On Sundays, I don't have time to run to the store or drive all over the place picking up everything that my boys and I need before kickoff, especially on days like today when I had hockey in the morning. So I call on DoorDash to help me out. DoorDash is my go-to because they are the best and most reliable place for all of my delivery orders. Local restaurants, grocery stores, anything that we need to be game day ready can be delivered with DoorDash. Use promo code LOCKEDFALL24 for 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Limited time offer. Terms apply. Promo is not valid on orders containing alcohol. DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now and order your game day favorites. And don't forget promo code LOCKEDFALL24 for 50% off up to $10 on your first order when you spend $15 or more. Must be 21 and over to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol only available in select markets. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. I'm going to give you my biggest takeaways, starting with the running backs coming up in just a moment. But the new Locked On NFL is here. Locked On NFL is now 2 shows every day. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Then you get the Locked On local experts and unprecedented NFL insight all in 30 minutes. It's Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Make your second listen the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. My biggest takeaway on the offensive side of the ball for this one is Rachaad White is on thin ice. You all know that I am a big Rachaad White guy. I have been big on his upside for the season for a while, especially since the draft, but he's not getting the job done. 2.1 yards per carry this season. That's it. And I was talking to one of the insiders about it. There is a difference between the run plays that are called for Rachaad and the run plays that are called for Bucky. Rachaad is getting more of those straight line power calls. The problem is there's no power in front of him to clear space. When Bucky is running the ball, there's a lot of misdirection, cutbacks, counters, stretches. Maybe Rachaad needs more of those kinds of play calls and opportunities, or to play devil's advocate here, maybe Bucky's doing it more on his own with his elite vision. Either way, the shift needs to happen. Bucky Irving needs far more touches moving forward than he's currently getting. I cannot imagine that Rachaad is too happy after today's game. And at the rate he's going, he has just about as much of a chance to reach 1,000 rushing yards this season as I do. This was one of the worst run defenses in the NFL, and he managed to get 17 yards. The Bucs as a team got 91. 32 of those came on one play. You take away Bucky Irving's 32-yard run, which was the longest run of the season, by the way. It topped Bucky Irving's previously longest run of the season by a yard. But the Bucs had 59 rushing yards against a team that was allowing over 140 a game. That is pathetic. On the season, Rachaad has 66 yards on 31 carries. Bucky has 154 yards on 25 carries. That is a major problem for this offense. Maybe some of it is the blocking. Maybe some of it is the play calling. But it sure looks like a majority of it is that Bucky is just flat out a better runner than Rachaad is. The eyeball test is telling us who should be getting more carries right now. And if the Bucs are truly going to ride the hot hand like they said they were going to, then that hand is attached to the arm and the body of Bucky Irving, and he needs the opportunities that he has earned. Not that he should get or, they might want to try to give him. No, Bucky has earned these opportunities now. And if the Bucs are going to jumpstart this rushing attack, Bucky needs to be the one leading the charge right now. That doesn't mean Rachaad White is a bad football player. That doesn't mean that Rachaad White is a bad running back. But right now, he is struggling. He's still effective when he gets opportunities in the passing game, but Bucky Irving is a more effective runner. And if you want to keep this offense two-dimensional, then Bucky needs to be the guy toting the rock the majority of the time. My biggest takeaway on the defensive side of the ball is that you can't blame injuries forever. No, there was no Kalijah Kancey or Vita Vea, but you know what? They weren't there last week either. Vita Vea played half, but Kancey hasn't been on the field yet this season. This was the week. This was the week for the defense to show out and make big plays. I said it on Inside the 813. I said it on this show on Crossover Thursday and the preview episode on Friday. Yaya Diaby had to step up and show that he was worth all the hype. He didn't, and it looks like he's not. 2 tackles, that's it. 2 tackles for Yaya Diaby. Anthony Nelson had opportunities, then Nix made him look like a fool. JTS had opportunities, he couldn't finish. Dumb penalties, bad form, poor tackling, all of it led to Nix looking like an all-pro and the pass rushers left tackling air. It was an absolutely abysmal display from this defense. Zion looked good again. Levante was Levante. Jordan Whitehead was solid. Everyone else, atrocious. Even Chris Braswell had a pressure that led to an incomplete pass at the end of the first half. Diaby didn't even have that in this game. At least last week, I could point back to Diaby and say, look, his pressures disrupted Jared Goff here. His pressure got Jared Goff off of his spot and caused a change in timing from what Goff needed to do. He didn't have that this week against Bo Nix. Then this defense manages to get offsides penalties on back-to-back plays to take a 3rd and 14 to a 3rd and 4. It's Bush League. That's Pee-wee stuff. Where was that defense that we saw in Detroit? Where was that smothering, fast, sure tackling group of players that shut down everything in front of them because they had a point to prove? They were out there to prove it doesn't matter if we're missing guys. It doesn't matter if we're missing captains. It doesn't matter if the Lions beat us in this same arena in the divisional round. We can beat them on any given Sunday. Where was that team? Where were those players? Because they were not on the field in Tampa on Sunday. I said it on Friday. Bo Nix can get rattled and make mistakes, but you have to get after him early in the game to set the tone. 2 quarterback hits the entire game, and both of them were from Chris Braswell. Nix completed his first 5 passes. He went 19 for 24 in the first half. They weren't anywhere close to making him uncomfortable. That dude was curled up on his bed in a Snuggie, binging Netflix and eating Ben and Jerry's level of comfortable all day long in that pocket. The Bucs have allowed 97 straight pass attempts without getting a sack. Think about how truly bad that is. At some point, you can't use injuries as an excuse anymore. If we're going to sing the praises of Todd Bowles in this defense for overcoming the injuries and getting a statement win on the road against the Lions, then you can't turn around and say that injuries were the reason that you lost at home to the freaking Broncos. So this team goes from winning a game that they probably shouldn't have to losing a game that they absolutely shouldn't have. I have plenty to say about that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. After Sunday's performance, the Bucs have dropped to plus 4,100 odds to win the Super Bowl, trailing teams like the Seahawks, Bengals, Cowboys, Saints, Vikings, and yes, even the Atlanta Falcons. And I have to imagine that they're going to be home underdogs to the Philadelphia Eagles next week, even though those odds have not been released yet. You're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Go to FanDuel.com, download the FanDuel app, America's #1 sportsbook. Wrapping things up here on a post-game reaction episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And there are no game balls. We don't do game balls for losses. Instead, let's have an airing of the grievances. Or some of you longtime everydayers, some of you insiders, you may call it one of my famous soapboxes. But this needs to be said. Bear with me for a moment. You blew it, Bucs. You completely and utterly blew it. There's no excuse for that performance. There is no excuse for that loss. And coming off a week where everyone was up in arms about how the Bucs weren't in the contender conversation following the win against Detroit, or that 33rd team quarterback power ranking that we were talking about on Twitter that had Baker 16th, and many others, called him out. We had a reaction to it over at the 813.tv. You cannot, under any circumstances, have that kind of performance after all of the stuff that happened this past week and then still be taken seriously. Todd Bowles did not have this team prepared to play, but it does not fall solely on his shoulders. This team didn't execute at all. They did everything wrong all game. The defensive line was being manhandled. The offensive line was getting zero push. Baker looked completely off. Jamel Dean got cooked so much, half of him is still stuck to the bottom of the pan. It was pathetic. You want to talk about being in the conversation with the big boys? You want to talk about being looked at in the same tier as the Lions and the Niners and the Ravens and the Chiefs? They don't lose these games. They don't lose at home to 0-2 teams with a rookie quarterback that had 0 touchdowns and 4 interceptions on the season. They don't get embarrassed at home by a team that hasn't won in the month of September in over 2 years. Those true contenders, those legitimate teams, they don't lose the game the Buccaneers just lost. Heading into this stretch, the Bucs stole a game that they should not have won, at least not on paper. On Sunday, they turned around and they gave that game right back and ruined everything that the last week accomplished for them. It lessened the significance and the importance of that win. It stained what we were going to be in a position to talk about, and that was the Bucs taking a big step that no one thought they could. That was the Bucs being 3-0 to leading the division that no one picked them to win outside of Bucs media. Like Dennis Green said, they are who we thought they were. A team that fell in the trap against a lesser opponent because they were focused on what was coming, not what was directly in front of them. Baker has to own this one. Todd has to own this one. Liam, Rachaad, the offensive line. Yes, the entire offensive line, even Tristan. They have to own this one. Jason Light has to figure out a solution at edge rusher because Diaby isn't the guy that you can anchor yourself to. He's not the guy that you can pin your hat on and say, he's the future of this team. He is the future of this defense. He's not Shaq. He's not JPP. He's a complimentary piece. He's Joe Tryon-Shoyinka with more hype and a fun name. Shaq, JPP, they take over that game. They eat Frank Crumb for lunch. They get Knicks on the ground early. They rattle him. Diaby was a ghost. He's Robin. He's not Batman. It's too late to do anything about it now. The Bucs aren't trading for Hassan Reddick. There's no one to bring in at this stage to improve the edge rush. You have to sit there and wait for Kalijah Kancey and Vita Vea to come back for the pass rush to actually show some signs of life. But that's going to be the talk all offseason now. We just finished week 3, and we're talking about what the highest priority in free agency or the draft is, because we already know it. We already know it. It's an alpha edge rusher. On a day where we should be talking about the Buccaneers being 3-0 for the first time since 2005 and in sole possession of first place in the NFC South, they blow an opportunity to take advantage of the Saints losing. And of course, we have to wait and see what Atlanta does against a weakened Kansas City Chiefs team. This was bad. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You all know that's not how I operate. If the Bucs somehow miss the playoffs or miss out on an opportunity to win the NFC South yet again, we're coming back to this game. We're coming back to week 3. We're pointing on a calendar and saying that was a huge missed opportunity to go into the toughest stretch of the schedule 3-0 with a really good buffer. I don't expect the Bucs to rattle off 6 wins in a row now. But a 3-0 start, to have that buffer that you would go into the bye over 500, you got to go steal another one now. You might have to steal 2. This team read their press clippings. They were feeling themselves, and they walked in expecting just to roll over Denver, and they got punched square in the face. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So what's the plan now? How do the Bucs not let this one loss turn into 2 and then 3, maybe more? How do you bounce back to get to 3-1 next week? It starts with some of these guys holding themselves accountable for how bad they screwed up. Players, coaches, everyone. It starts with them looking in the mirror and saying, this one's on you. There's a whole lot of people in that building that can do that. Then, after they've done that, after they've held themselves accountable, it's on this team to collectively keep feeling this feeling. Keep this feeling in the pit of their stomach all week long. Use it as fuel. Feed off of how bad this game was and how hungry it makes you for the next one. Take all that frustration that you have with yourself, with the team that just beat you, with that godforsaken Sean Payton, and you use it on Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. You use it on those Philadelphia Eagles. And you say, no. Last week was a fluke. This is the real us. This is the team that's going to win the division and make some noise in the playoffs. Everyone's entitled to a down week, but now the honeymoon is over. That 2-0 start, that win in Detroit, it's over. It's time to get back to work. It's time to get back to reality. Going to jump into the chat one more time before we get out of here. We got David in the chat saying, bring Shaq back. I mean, he wasn't really effective last year. I don't know if it helps. I really don't. I love Shaq. But the Shaq that I'm talking about, when I was referencing Yaya Diaby not being that guy, I'm referencing 2019, 2020, 2021 Shaq, not 2023 Shaq. We got Philip in the chat saying, I'd try Klein at right guard. You know, I don't think that is too far out of the question. If Cody Mauch overall has been a solid player, he had a bad game against Denver. Other than this game, he's been pretty good this year. But he has one more game like this, and they might start to think about it. Ben in the chat saying, I did predict this loss, and the next few weeks is going to be brutal. It will be a lengthy losing streak till the bye week. I'm taking it week by week. You know, I thought the Bucs were better than falling into the trap game. I thought that this team was a little bit different. This team had their head on straight, and they weren't going to overlook Denver. I knew it was a possibility, but I thought, you know what? They got this. I was wrong. David in the chat says they're picking on Mauch's side because Gedeke is out. That's probably pretty fair. My nephew says, hello, Uncle Jimmy. Hi, Zach. Appreciate you jumping in here at the end here. And then Lakita in the chat says, you weren't the only one who thought we were ready. Yeah. Chalk this one up. You know, like Todd Bowles said, all they can do is move on to next week. All I can do is move on from the rest of this episode because we are way over on time. I want to thank each and every one of you that jumped into the live chat, including my nephew again. Hi, Zach. Appreciate you, even though you're not a Bucs fan. Please check out everything going on over at the 813.tv. Make sure that you are following on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to have one-on-one text conversations with me, no ads or anything like that. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider. And please make sure you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're subscribed on YouTube, turn on those notifications and hit the like button. It helps other Bucs fans find us. You guys blew up the post-game reaction episode against the Lions. A lot of new subscribers and followers came from that one. I appreciate all of you that do that. And we will be back tomorrow with more reaction to this one. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.